Hello, everyone. My name is Shrishna. I'm a PhD candidate at the Department of Political Science, and I'm going to moderate the session today. In the interest of time, we're going to get started as people continue to log in and join in the conversation. So, on that note, I welcome you all to the Rockefeller College Lunch and Learn series. These events will be taking place throughout this semester. The intention of Lunch and Learn series is to highlight the expertise of our faculty and learn about their research and how it impacts society. During the Lunch and Learn hour, we get to talk about some of the most important issues in politics and public policy in the country and around the world. These events also aim to educate the audience and our community on relevant issues and topics. For our session today, we are pleased to have Professor Rey Koslowski join us. Professor Koslowski is professor and director of the Master of International Affairs program at the Department of Political Science at Rockefeller College. His teaching and research interests are in the field of international relations, dealing with international organizations, European integration, international migration, information technology, and homeland security. Professor Koslowski is the author and editor and co-editor of the books on migrants and the demographic change in the European states, international migration and the globalization of domestic politics, and global human smuggling. The topic for today is changing US immigration policies toward the highly skilled and global competition for AI talent. In his talk, Professor Koslowski is going to focus on US policies toward international students and high-skilled migrant workers, primarily H-1B visa holders, many of whom became the scientists, engineers, and entrepreneurs who helped build America's IT industries and develop the technologies of artificial intelligence. Professor Koslowski will highlight recent policy changes aimed at reducing the number of international students and high-skilled migrants in the US, as well as explain how competitor countries, particularly China, are taking advantage of US immigration policy changes to increase their AI talent pools. As of last academic year, over 1 million international students were enrolled across the US universities, the highest globally. Amid the policy changes we have been hearing, Professor Koslowski's talk is timely to help us understand both short-term and long-term implications of these policies. So before I turn it over to our speaker, I'm just going to go over ground rules. You're all requested to remain muted and hold your questions until the presentation is over. We're going to have enough time for Q&A towards the end of the discussion. You can use the raise your hand function on Zoom or send your question in the chat. If you would like to remain anonymous, you can send your question in the private message to me here, and I'm going to read the question aloud. If you submitted a question in advance, I will read it out. And with that, I'm going to give the floor to Professor Koslowski.
Well, thank you very much, Shrejna, for that introduction. And first off, I got to say, can you all see my PowerPoint? Yeah, okay, great. So, this is something that I've been working on and I've for a long time and on high skilled migration, but I've changed my focus and focusing in now on this whole issue of artificial intelligence. And this is a new project for me. So I really want to thank you for the opportunity to present some very preliminary work here. Um, so, in the United States, the majority of immigrant visas that give permanent resident status or green cards, all right, they are allocated to those sponsored by family members who are already U.S. citizens or permanent residents. Now, employers, they may also sponsor up to 140,000 new permanent residents per year. Employers may also petition the federal government for temporary non-immigrant visas. This is the terminology that's used to employ migrant workers. And this includes high-skilled migrant workers. Now, those seeking to immigrate to the US based on, their education and skills, they must be sponsored by an employer. So it's the employer who effectively selects individual migrants within kind of broad policy guidelines and criteria that are established by the government. I was thinking about this, but really, in like fashion, students from abroad who are accepted for enrollment in a U.S. university, now they receive something called an I-20 form from the university, and then they register in the Student Exchange Visitor Information System, or SEVIS. And then they take that I-20 form to a US embassy or consulate in order to apply for a student visa. Now, if an international student eventually uh, adjusts status to permanent resident, it will have been the university that first enrolled that student that, in a sense, initially selected this immigrant. So now, US selective migration policies towards permanent immigrants, temporary migrants, international students, they've been leveraged to recruit computer scientists and information technology workers, uh, especially artificial intelligence, AI talent. Um, the technologies that have come to constitute AI have largely been developed in the US, and the US remains the top work destination for top tier AI talent. Be that as it may, China has, by some measures, eclipsed the US as the biggest producer of AI talent. And the Chinese government is also implementing policies to encourage the return of Chinese who have studied abroad, as well as to attract high-skilled migrants, particularly AI experts. So I'll elaborate on some of these points in four steps. First, I'll describe the US selective migration policies to increase migration of the highly skilled, primarily through the H-1B visa program and international student visas. Second, I'll explain how immigrants, most of who came to the US as international students and migrant workers on H-1B visas, how they became the scientists, the engineers, and entrepreneurs who really helped build America's information technologies industries and developed the technologies that increasingly are packaged under this label of artificial intelligence. Third, I'll review recent policy changes aimed at reducing the number of international students and high-skilled migrants in the US. And then I'll finish up by explaining how competitor countries, really, I'll just be focusing on China, is taking advantage of US immigration policy changes to increase, particularly AI talent pools. Oops. Now, the 1990 Immigration Act provides the current framework for temporary non-immigrant work visas, as well as employer-sponsored immigration visas giving permanent resident status. And this has basically allowed temporary high-skilled workers to adjust status to permanent resident, and that has shaped high-skilled migration to the US over the past 35 years. And that's what I'm going to be explaining to you now, that uh, the 1990 Act established the H-1B visa that enabled employers to offer permanent jobs to migrants of, quote, distinguished merit or ability in, quote, specialty occupations on a 3-year one-time renewable visa. So before 1990, the then existing H-1 visa program basically enabled migrants to fill temporary jobs, but they had to establish their intent to return home. All right. Now, the 1990 Act dropped that requirement to demonstrate that intent, and therefore the H-1B visa is called a dual intent visa. So it means that the H-1B visa allows um, people to enter the United States for a specific, limited stay, but they also have an option to adjust to permanent resident status. So by opening up these permanent jobs to temporary visa holders, the program gave much more flexibility to employers to hire migrants for any job, permanent or temporary. And this dual nature of the visa made it more appealing to a lot of highly skilled people from around the world who wanted to immigrate or at least wanted to have that option, right? To be able to do that. Now, employers must file petitions to the US government on behalf of prospective temporary migrant workers. Um, Again, those individuals abroad, they don't file it. It's the employer that files it. And the number of visas for initial employment issued per year was capped at 65,000. Now, there's no cap on the number of H-1B workers employed by institutions of higher education, nonprofit research organizations, and government research agencies. And then in 2005, Congress added 20,000 H-1B visas per year for initial employment of those who have earned a master's degree or higher from a U.S. institution of higher education. Now, there is no cap on applications for renewals of H-1 visas for a second 3 years. Now, here's the thing. As employer demand for H-1B visas surpassed the allocated quotas of 85,000, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, or USCIS, adopted basically a lottery system. So the government's fiscal year begins October 1st, which is the date that each new batch of H-1B visas becomes available. And the earliest that an employer can file a petition is 6 months before the start date of a new employee is hired on a visa. So April 1st is the earliest date that employer can file for a new hire in the next fiscal year allocation of H-1B visas. So back in fiscal year 2007, the H-1B cap was reached with the number of petitions submitted by May 26th of 2006. So USCIS announced that after that date, petitions are returned. Anything that came on that date would be subject to random selection. The next year, it announced that the cap was reached on the first day that it was filing, that was permitted, in April 2nd. And so this H-1B lottery system was created basically to determine out of all of the petitions received who would receive that visa. Now, that cap has been reached within the first week of April since 2014. And then between 2014 and 2020, there were between 24,000 and 236,000 petitions submitted that were entered into the lottery for 85,000 available visas. Then USCIS introduced this electronic registration process for these H-1B petitions in 2021. Here, employers only needed to electronically submit basic information, full name, passport number, etc., instead of the whole petition. And this usually starts at the beginning of March, lasts about 2 or 3 weeks. So since fiscal year 2021, there have been between 275,000 and 780,000 petitions entered into the lottery for those 85,000 available H-1B visas. So here are the statistics for the number of H-1B visas approved each year. We had a total of the 85,000 visas for initial employment. You could see the caps, the 65,000 in red, the vertical bar, and then 85,000 in orange, that vertical bar. Then you have an unlimited number of visas for universities and a limited number of visas for renewals. It's important to note that these petitions approved, it doesn't necessarily equate with the number of visa holders in the country, because some may not arrive in the US for their jobs. They may not stay employed for the full 3 years and leave the country, or they may adjust to another visa status or permanent residency. Now, if you look at the progression here from bottom to top, we see that in the 15 years from 2005 to 2020, the total number of H-1B petitions submitted by employers and then approved increased 60% to over 425,000. I mean, how could this be with the cap staying the same there? They haven't increased. So while there was some growth of those hired by universities, the what we see is the real growth came in the number of H-1B workers whose employers sponsored them for a renewal of their visa to continue working for an additional 3 years. And in that 15 years from 2005 to 2020, not only has the number of petitions increased by 60%, the number of H-1B visa holders in computer-related occupations increased 160% to almost 300,000. Now, Indian nationals have consistently received a majority of the H-1B visas, followed by Chinese nationals, and other countries only have a few thousand each. Um, Also, the percentage of the H-1B visa petitions of those holding a master's or PhD increased from 42% to 61% from 2005 to 2020, while the percentage of those with only a bachelor's degree decreased from 45 to 36%. So clearly, the additional 20,000 visas for the graduates of US universities, that allowed employers to bring more workers with more advanced degrees. And these workers were sponsored for a second 3-year visa. So the effect is that the overall number of master's level visa holders has increased. Here we see a shift from employers who are sponsoring bachelor's level workers, mostly computer programmers and engineers in a 3-year temporary job, to hiring more educated personnel for more permanent, if you will, jobs for up to 6 years. And then this is very interesting. In 2012, the Congressional Research Service estimated that 90% of the 140,000 employment-based green cards were issued to individuals who originally entered the US as international students and temporary workers, many of whom came on H-1B visas. So the net effect has been a flow of high-skilled migrants who essentially immigrate to the US on a temporary visa and then obtain permanent resident status several years later. And I want to switch to international students. So, once upon a time, Australian, Canadian, and US policymakers, they mostly viewed international students as, future engineers, physicians, teachers who would return to help their countries of origin develop economically, technologically, etc. Well, over the past 25 years, policymakers are increasingly viewing international students as, future high-skilled immigrants who can further economic development of their city, of their region, of their state, or the country as a whole. You know, uh, it really starts in 1999. The Australian government basically removed a previous 3-year ban on international students immigrating to Australia. And what they do, they added 5 bonus points in their skilled migration program for earning a degree at an Australian university. By 2002, international students comprised half of the permanent skilled immigrant stream. Canada basically followed the Australia example, revised its points system in 2007 to give priority to applications lodged by international students who completed their degrees in Canada. Then, in the United States, we have international students who graduate. They may be authorized for up to 12 months of full-time paid optional practical training, or OPT. In 2008, the Bush administration, seeing what Canada and Australia were doing, they established an additional 17 months of OPT for STEM degree holders. And then starting in 2016, that became a 24-month STEM OPT. And again, back in 2008, former Representative Jeff Flake, Republican of Arizona, he introduced the Stopping Trained in America PhDs from Leaving the Economy Act, or the Staple Act. The idea was to staple a green card onto PhD diplomas. This legislation was repeatedly introduced in Congress and repeatedly failed. So, nevertheless, the increasing percentage of H-1B workers that the US hired were not educated abroad, but rather earned their undergraduate and graduate degrees in the US, and then found an employer willing to sponsor them for an H-1B visa. So, um, basically, as these countries all opened their doors a bit more to international students and gave them more options for work after graduating, the numbers increased. For example, between 2005 and 2019, again, the year before the COVID-19 pandemic, the number of international students in the United States increased by 94% to almost 1.1 million. Chinese government also encouraged Chinese universities to recruit students from abroad, and the international student population grew by almost 250% from 141,000 in 2005 to almost 492,000, which placed it, sorry, actually it was above that a bit, placed it third in rank behind the US and the UK that year. You could see that in red. Um, you know, Basically following the example of other countries competing for the high-tech talent in January of 2017, the Chinese government also began allowing foreign students to adjust status to high-skilled migrant visas instead of requiring them to go home after finishing their studies. So this also opened a pipeline for future high-skilled migrants coming to China. So now we'd like to head to the second part of my talk. And basically, think of it this way. International students and high-skilled migrants really helped build America's information technology industries. So we've got this combination of US universities, high-tech industries, and high-skill migration that really gave rise to this ecosystem of innovation that produced the information revolution of the 1990s and many of the technologies of artificial intelligence. So, information technology related fields of study came to dominate, um, among the students hosted by US universities. The 281,000 international students in the math and computer science field in 2023, that represented an increase of 335% from 1998. So really the net effect has been increasing immigration to the US via international education following a series of steps, right? So first, get accepted to a US university, enter the US on a student visa, and complete a degree program. Then work for 1 to 3 years on optional practical training and STEM extensions, during which time you find an employer to petition for an H-1B visa, which then enables you to work in the US for up to 6 years, during which time your employer sponsors you for a green card. And it's in this way that immigrants have come to constitute a growing share of all workers in science and engineering occupations. Indeed, a majority of those working in computer science, math, and engineering positions that require a PhD. So, this critical mass of foreign-born IT talent has enabled many innovations in computer science and other STEM fields, and it's really made breakthroughs in artificial intelligence possible. So, immigrant graduates of US universities, many of whom arrived as undergraduate, they basically comprise much of AI talent. So there was this study of 43 US companies on the Forbes AI 50 list of the top AI startup companies, founded that 28 were founded by immigrants, and 18 had a founder who came to the US as an international student. And we've got the top AI leaders in the US list, which is published by AI Magazine, and it focuses on leading scientists who have turned their ideas into major corporations, or they've held top AI positions in the country's largest IT companies. 8 out of 10 of prominent AI leaders are immigrants, and 5 of these immigrants received their undergraduate degrees in the US. So in on January 15th, 2025, like the last week of the Biden administration. So the US Council of Economic Advisors issued this AI talent report, which assessed AI talent in the US in comparison with other countries. Now, the report classifies educational fields to identify graduates who are likely to have the skills necessary to contribute to the AI sector, and then it estimates the number of workers needed to meet AI labor demand. Now, the Council of Economic Advisors identifies as AI relevant those science and engineering degrees are directly or indirectly related to software related demand, for example, computer science, computational mathematics, but also linguistics, as well as hardware related demands such as electrical engineering and material physics, but not other STEM fields like aeronautical engineering, geology, or medicine. And then on their list down at the bottom are the fields that are irrelevant to AI software or hardware. And I was a little chagrined to see that Polish language and literature doesn't cut it. Now, in terms of the number of AI related degrees awarded in the US, this slide is divided into 2 graphs from the report. So we've got the software related AI degrees on the left side of the slide and the hardware related degrees on the right side. So the number of AI relevant graduates in the United States has grown in the last decade, but the production of hardware related AI graduate and master's degrees basically peaked in the late 2010s. However, non-US citizens make up a significant share of graduates, with foreign PhDs comprising over half of AI relevant PhD graduates. So now I'd like to turn to recent policy changes. So over the past 9 months, the Trump administration has initiated policy changes that reduce the number of international students in the US. And it's also changing the implementation of H-1B, the H-1B visa program in ways that are likely to have major consequences for the STEM and AI workforce that we've just been talking about. So starting in early 2025, the Trump administration took actions that basically have removed international students from the US, blocked them from coming to the US, dissuade them from studying in the US in the future, and in doing so, encourage those who have graduated from US universities to return home or move elsewhere. So first off, the Trump administration began revoking F-1 visas of international students this spring for felony and misdemeanor arrests and convictions, but oftentimes for minor offenses, including traffic violations like speeding. And I even saw reference to jaywalking. All right. Most of these international students also appear to have been from India and China, including many students in science engineering. And as of April 24th of this 2025, the State Department revoked over 1,800 student visas, and ICE terminated thousands of SEVIS records, which also is raising serious concerns around due process. So on April 25th, the Trump administration announced that it would restore all terminated SEVIS records, but many student visas remained revoked, and several students had already left the country. On April 26th, ICE issued a broadcast message opening the door for future visa revocations and CVIS record terminations, including reterminations of individuals whose CVIS records were restored. On May 28th, the State Department announced that it would start aggressively, quote unquote, revoking visas of Chinese students, quote, including those with connections to the Chinese Communist Party or studying in critical fields. As of a June 4th executive order, we've got visa bans, restrictions targeting 19 countries, and media reports that the administration is considering another 36 to be added. And then we have, ways in which the administration is blocking prospective students from coming. So on May 22nd, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem issued a letter to Harvard University decertifying university's student exchange visitor program status. On May 27th, Secretary of State Marco Rubio issued a State Department cable directing consular officers to halt all interview scheduling for new F1, J1, and M1 visa applicants so that the State Department could roll out an expanded social media vetting process. Then, we see on June 18th, the Department of State lifts this previous pause on the interviews, but then rolls out this vetting policy. Under this policy, consular officers will screen applicants' online presence, including social media, for signs of hostility, quote, towards the citizens, culture, government, institutions, or founding principles of the United States. Now, these actions increase the risk that even if international students manage to enroll in US universities, they might not be able to complete their degree programs. And given the high cost of attendance at US universities, the financial risks may be unacceptable, not only for the students, but also for their families. And in this way, the Trump administration's actions, they basically are dissuading international students from applying to US universities and may give many graduates with IT and AI experience second thoughts about pursuing their careers in the US. Of course, this opens up opportunities for universities in countries that have encouraged more international student migration, like Canada, Australia, and China, to recruit promising international students into the STEM fields. So now the administration is also introducing rulemaking that would change the process for approving H-1B petitions. Particularly, there is an effort to reform the lottery. Remember, just think about it, approvals of 85,000 petitions out of 300,000, 500,000, or 700,000 petitions, and then basically selecting these skilled migrants by chance. And then we have, the top employers of H-1B workers are large IT firms like Amazon, Google, Apple, and Meta, then IT consulting firms like Infosys, Cognizant, and Wipro. Some large firms with subsidiaries, they were having each subsidiary submit a petition for the same employee that they want to hire. So think about it, before September 19th, it cost employers, somewhere between $2,000 and $5,000 to submit a petition, depending on the size of the employer. Now, the Trump administration implemented a rule change that was initiated by the Biden administration. So instead of awarding the H-1B to a company with that position and tracking the applications by company, what's begun now is to track applications by the applicant and limit each applicant to one petition for any given position, rather than an employer that has had subsidiaries put in 5, 10 uh, petitions in for the one applicant that they really want. And last month, on the 19th, the Trump administration announced that there would be a $100,000 supplementary fee on employer petitions for the initial employment of H-1B visas, not on renewals. Uh, the cap exempt universities aren't exempt from the $100,000 fee. And there's also rulemaking at the comment stage that H-1B visas, the awards of those positions, they would go to positions that are paying the highest salaries in various categories rather than the completely random approach that had existed. So this gives opportunities, particularly to China. Xi Jinping and other Chinese leaders have initiated measures to encourage the return of highly skilled Chinese who work abroad, and as well as to further encourage high skilled immigration of people from around the world. For example, back in November of 2023, Xi Jinping invited 50,000 Americans to China for exchange visits and for study over the next 5 years. And then this past year, China began allowing visa-free entry for stays of up to 30 days for citizens of some EU member states. And now that's grown to a total of over 75 countries. And perhaps most intriguing, the State Council of China announced that the impending launch of what's called the K visa. It was scheduled for October 1st. And according to this August announcement, the K visa would be issued to young uh, foreigners with scientific and technological talents who have graduated either from well-known Chinese or foreign universities. The applications for these visas would not require the Chinese employer to issue an invitation. And there would not be any specific age, education, or work experience requirements. And basically, this would allow skilled young foreigners, whether former Chinese nationals or not, to engage in educational exchanges as well as relevant entrepreneurial and business activities, as they put it. So it appears that China is making a play for these so-called digital nomads and wooing away IT talent from the US and other OECD countries. But then, as we were getting close to October 1st, there was opposition by many unemployed Chinese university graduates and probably their parents, and the launch of the K visa has been delayed. So listen, I'm going to leave it at that point, and I have some ideas on some of the implications and consequences that we might see from these latest policy changes, but I'd like to leave that open for discussion.
Thank you, Professor Koslowski. I'm going to request those of you who have a question to please raise their hand on the Zoom option. And while we're gonna see a hand raise, I'm just gonna ask the first question that was submitted to us in advance of the talk. So the first question is to Professor Koslowski: how are academic institutions and SUNY in particular impacted by changes in this policy area, both in terms of international enrollment, but also for hiring employees of the system? And I know you touched upon this during your talk, but if you can just expand on that.
Well, I know for sure, just seeing our enrollment figures for the fall, uh, our graduate programs were way down, and that was attributed to international students who couldn't come. Some have deferred. I know in the program that I administer, whether they are going to come in the spring or not is an open question. Perhaps they might be going somewhere else. Who knows? All right. So it's really an open question. There was an estimate that some 15% of, and again, this is just entries into the country, right? Of people with F1 visas, it was 15% lower than last year. That might have been an indication. All right. Uh, it's going to be hard to know. uh, until we see those statistics sometime in the future and they're released. Now, the implication in terms of how we work as faculty and we recruit faculty is going to be tremendous, and postdoctoral researchers in the sciences, because usually, right, there people are brought on with H-1B visas. They'll first have optional practical training, and they could do postdocs in the STEM fields on that extension. But eventually, if they're going to be brought on assistant professorships, they would be hired on an H-1B visa normally. Um, for 3 years, they have get a renewal, another 3 years, go up for tenure after six. At that time is a good time also to hopefully get that permanent resident status adjustment. So the university isn't limited in the number of visas because there's no cap. But now, $100,000 fee. I mean, how will that? I mean, in many fields, that's the whole salary of an assistant professor, and then you're going to basically uh, add another $100,000. I don't know how many schools are going to be able to afford this, quite frankly, and it's going to dissuade hiring. And then if it's and postdoctoral research is the same problem occurs here. And so, what has been working so well to this pipeline that I described, I just see it being turned off, and in the STEM fields, and it's going to be, yeah, sure, the really rich schools are probably going to be able to do this, but for a lot of other schools, they're not going to expend that kind of those kinds of resources. Now, this new fee, it's been clarified in different ways and all, and who knows, maybe that's changed, but I have yet to see an exemption for universities.
Thank you. The second question, I believe, is more of a practical question. What advice would you give to international students or early career professionals navigating US visa challenges today? And again, you touched upon some of these issues, and you said that, the current administration has been dissuading, potential international students. So what is your advice to them?
Well, here's the thing. I'm not an immigration lawyer, and I don't give advice about these matters because it's potential malpractice if you think of it. Look, I would think that people just need to be careful in how they're looking at their options. And quite frankly, I say this to a lot of my students more generally, is that you have to have a plan B, a plan C, a plan D in terms of where you might go for continuing education, where you might apply for tenure stream jobs, et cetera, for graduates students. And I think thinking about the options is really important, and to be realistic as well with yourself in the situation. I guess that's the best that I can do.
Thank you. Tell us if there is a need for an overhaul of past immigration and employment policy. So, for example, you talked about the 1990 Immigration Act. If yes, so if there is a need, then how should the US government go about reforming the system if there is a need to reform it? And if no, if your answer would be no, then how do you respond to some of the hardline critiques of US's overdependence on foreign workers for high skilled categories?
Look, you know, every both parties have, you can go back for decades and see how members of Congress of both parties and presidential candidates have said the immigration system is broken. But comprehensive immigration reform failed in 1996. We only got, part it didn't address legal migration, addressed unauthorized migration. It failed in 2006, failed in 2007, failed in 2013, and bills only pass through the Senate. It's been impossible, and we're stuck with this very rigid system. All right. And basically it's been utilizing the tools that are available. And you know, and as far as I would say too, in terms of over reliance, and there had been, quite a bit of criticism of the H-1B program, especially like in the 1990s and the early 2000s, where bachelor's level programmers would come and they would, firms would bring them in and then kick the US uh, uh, native born programmers out because the H-1B workers were cheaper, right? And that was happening, no doubt about it. But the nature of the program has changed because so many of the new H-1Bs over the past decade or so are these folks who have not just bachelor's, but they have master's degrees and PhD degrees, right? A greater percentage, and they're not coming in for 3 years and those good, but moving on and also all of those jobs, those visas, there's a labor market certification where firms have to demonstrate that U.S. workers can't fill that particular job. And we're probably going to see, that being more strictly enforced, et cetera. But here's the other flip side of this. As far as the firms, what the firms are doing, the big IT firms and all, they're saying, well, if you're not going to give us the workers here, we're just going to have to outsource the work. And that's the other thing that happened is a whole lot of uh, software development in the 2000s was shipped off to Bangalore, India. And Microsoft said, okay, you don't want to allow us to have more high skilled migrants. We're going to open up a facility in Vancouver. All right. So there are limits as to how policy can constrain the labor demands of the firms. And then there's the whole question of, all right, well, we need more US trained computer programmers and engineers, et cetera. But I showed you some of the figures here. But the other thing is the numbers in terms of in our undergraduate programs. I mean, and even high school students. I mean, the nation's report card showed real declines in high school abilities in math. And you know what? Here's the other thing. One of the biggest recipients of the educational, the uncapped, it's not just universities, but high school. The Dallas High School District is one of the largest in Texas. And they're bringing in math teachers and science teachers, right? So even if you want to build the domestic capacity in math and science, I don't know how the school districts, if SUNY's going to have to pay $100,000 for an assistant professor, how many school districts are going to be able to fork over $100,000 for a math teacher? It's there's again, there aren't easy answers to this, and one of the arguments has been that to have more people come in with permanent residence so that they aren't beholden to a firm and they can't be exploited, they can't be, uh, you know, given lower wages, et cetera, they can move to another firm, right? That's one option, but once again, that requires immigration reform. Those numbers, 140,000, are set in legislation. So I'm sorry that was a long answer, but
Thank
it
you.
was a good question.
I'm gonna request people in the audience to either use their raise either use raise your hand option or just type in your question to me. And another question that we have time for, I guess, a couple of questions. Another question that we have is, and again, Professor Koslowski, you've touched upon this issue. What are the broader economic and labor market implications of H-1B visa changes? And I know you've talked about these issues from a geopolitical lens, but how do we look at these issues from a US domestic policy lens? So to rephrase the question, to what extent is there evidence that US citizens are not being absorbed substantially by the US labor force in high-skilled categories? For example, we hear the US tech industry saying that they do not have enough qualified American workers who they
Mhm.
can hire. So I know you did mention that, one of the routes that these companies might use is to outsource, the job. What can some of the other implications be in the near future?
Well, I mean, one thing in terms of the change, these recent changes, is that and the objective that the Trump administration states is they want to make sure that the H-1B workers aren't, you know, that they are really the high skilled workers, that they are really the ones that firms want. And that's why they say, all right, now we're going to focus on the salary. And, a lot of the big firms said, great, we don't mind that. We'll just, uh, we're happy with paying the people we need more. The problem comes in with the smaller firms, the startups. And again, I come back to the postdoc researchers, the people who come up with a lot of the innovations that are necessary, and the small pharmaceutical startup that hires them, for example. They're going to have a very difficult time having that supply of talent. And, sure, it would be great if there were more US citizens who would get PhDs degrees in chemistry and biology and in engineering, but they're not doing it. It's a long road to hoe, as any of you and getting a PhD know, and a lot of times there are other options that uh, skilled American nationals have other than going to graduate school with a vow of poverty for, a half dozen or more years, right? So again, there aren't easy solution sets here, and uh, and the $100,000 supplementary fee, again, that is just going to hit the smaller uh, startup businesses. And uh, and so, sure, Google and Amazon, and they're going to be able to get whoever they want. But a lot of the firms that had business plans that focused on developing new technologies and eventually maybe going public, well, the the cost accounting scheme has just been transformed. And the bottom line, longer term thinking about it, again, this ecosystem of innovation, I don't know if we can, you know, expect the kinds of innovations that are being projected for example, artificial intelligence, right? So if you've got a majority of the AI relevant PhDs are foreign born, and a significant percentage of them are going to leave the country. Well, what does that mean for the future of AI in the United States? Right? Where is the next AI developments? Where are they going to occur? A large percentage of the S&P 500 now of the companies, the value of the S&P 500 are AI companies, and we're anybody's in a mutual fund that's S&P index is also heavily invested in uh, these companies. And well, I don't know, but I could tell you that this could present a problem to a lot of the scenarios for technological innovation and economic growth that is anticipated in these stock valuations.
Thank you. We have almost neared the end of the discussion today, but before we leave you, Professor Koslowski, I wanted you to respond quickly to Professor Novkov's question, and I'm going to read it out to you. So if you can sum it up, with the last minute for us, that would be great. So she asks, let's suppose that the American political system swings back to the Democrats in 2026 and 28. So what do you think will be the continuing effects of what is happening now? Or do you think a partisan reset would put us largely back to where we were back in 2023?
On high skilled migration, uh, I it's hard to say. Um, I think that there would be a reset. A lot of the most egregious uh, challenges for international students that will be probably changed immediately. The H-1B visa program, this lottery system, again, the Biden administration, I mean, everybody has had issues with it because it's not the way to go. Um, and this is one approach to addressing that with simply, you know, uh, giving the visas to the folks, to the companies that are willing to pay the most. But again, I anticipate that there will be problems with this affecting uh, the pipeline for innovation. And I'm sure that there would be modifications of it. But I don't think that going back to completely random selection would be the way that it would go. And the fee, the $100,000 fee, I doubt that would survive, especially on universities, et cetera. Um, but there may be a willingness to keep a higher fee than what existed before. I mean, this total, Julie, you've asked me to speculate. I try not to speculate too much, but total speculation, okay?
Thank you. And with that, we have neared the end of the discussion today. I want to thank Professor Koslowski for sharing his insights on this important topic, and I thank you all for attending. This event has been recorded, so you can watch it later on Rockefeller College's YouTube channel. And before we close, I want to note the date and topic of the next Lunch and Learn session. It'll be held next Tuesday on October 28 at the same time, and we're going to talk about public health at a crossroads, vaccination policy, and the Make America Health Again movement. So I hope to see you all at the next Lunch and Learn. You'll have the details in your email soon. Goodbye and have a nice day ahead. And thank you to Professor Koslowski.
And thank you very much.